Welcome to today's forum, a tribute to and discussion with Norman Atkins on his work, his influence on education, and his views on the needs and opportunities today. My name is Susanna Loeb, and I'm the director of the Annenberg Institute for School Reform and professor of education and of international and public affairs at Brown. It is my great pleasure to host Norman Atkins today from Brown's class of 1984, and who the university will honor tomorrow during commencement ceremonies with an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree. I'm delighted to have the opportunity for this conversation. Motivated by a lifelong commitment to fighting poverty through education, Norman leads Together Education, a nonprofit innovation studio that catalyzes enduring scalable solutions to pressing education challenges. He's also the co-founder and former president of Relay Graduate School of Education, which trains more than 5,000 public school educators annually. Norman is a nationally recognized education innovator, founding North Star Academy, one of New Jersey's most celebrated charter schools, and Uncommon Schools, among the nation's highest performing charter school network, serving 21,000 students in the Northeast. In 2013, Norman co-founded Cern, a digital math program that reaches nearly 1/4 of US elementary school students. Norman, great to see you today.
Great to see you, Susanna.
You graduated from Brown in 1984 as a history concentrator. What from your Brown education led you to your mission-driven work in education?
Oh my God, I only wish we were together, like on campus, and that we had been up all night with the class of 2021. Celebrating them at the campus dance. It feels weird to be doing this on Zoom. I just kind of looking back a little bit. I took a couple classes at Brown with a guy named Reginald Archambault, who taught the philosophy of education, and it was super deep. I was pushed to kind of think about what's my idea about the aims of education, and after considering, Plato and Rousseau and Dewey, I realized that I was much more stirred by Horace Mann's idea about democratizing education for all, and about the inspiration that Frederick Douglass took from learning how to read. And I remember sitting out at the park by the Roger Williams statue and just thinking that, looking down from the hill on the city of Providence, and just thinking, like, really, education is just meant to be a great leveler, a great up escalator for all people, and that like what I cared about and wanted to do was to help make that more possible for more people.
That's terrific. I saw you were the editor of the Brown Daily Herald when you were at Brown. How did those experiences affect your life course and the path that you chose to take?
Well, I was probably viewed by the president of Brown at the time, Howard Swearer, as a bit of a gadfly. I spent a lot of time thinking about how Brown could be better and fulfill its promise, and was quick to point out the hypocrisy and sometimes even the small-time corruption that I observed around me, and felt like it was my responsibility to report. But really, I just cared about the content of education and higher education, and how adults were delivering to students, and that was a lifelong interest. And I remember, so it must have been 37 years ago, commencement, that I wrote a piece that basically said all of us should graduate, and we should go out and teach in America's public schools. And this was maybe 5 years before the founding of Teach for America. But I remember just thinking, like, we were hidebound to take the privilege of our education and bring it to others.
That's terrific. You were one of the early leaders of the Robin Hood Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that foundation and its role in its community, which is New York City, and it still is New York City?
Yeah. So one of the great joys of Brown was developing a huge community of friends and lifelong collaborators. And one of my housemates from senior year was a guy named David Saltzman, and he was a public servant who had been invited to help start up the Robin Hood Foundation, and he asked me to co-lead the the public charity with him. And the first year we were maybe $1 million of grant making to organizations, community-based organizations helping poor people. And I think now it's, all these years later, it's like $150 million a year. And it probably is the signally most important public charity in helping community organizations in New York City in general, fighting poverty, and then specifically getting involved after 9/11 or Hurricane Sandy or COVID and providing kind of relief to the New York City community.
Were there any particular experiences there that you feel most proud about, that you still remember as something that really moved you and led to the next part of your work?
Well, it felt like, you know, I'd been a journalist for about 5 years after graduating from Brown, and I feel like I took my spirit of inquiry to the streets of New York and spent about another 5 years basically going and visiting every soup kitchen and every homeless shelter and every program for people with AIDS and substance abuse prevention programs. And I was very moved by the people I met and the organizations that were doing the best work helping people to survive. But what really kind of captured my heart were those programs that were aiming to break the cycle of poverty for the next generation. And so I looked around at just every after school program that I could find, and one of the best was led by a guy named Jeff Canada, who went on to found Harlem Children's Zone. And I came to realize that after school programs that were comprehensive, community-based, holistic, worked with kids and their families over the long term, were most likely to succeed, and developed a whole taxonomy on what are the best of those programs. But at the end of the day, I was just discouraged that after school programs were trying to mop up for all of the challenges that kids were facing all day during schools. And that kind of led me to basically visit more schools than anybody you've ever met. I came to believe that many of the New York City public schools in the lowest income communities in New York were chaotic, unsafe, not places where I would have thrived, were not where I would want my children to go to school, and therefore not really fair and right for the vast majority of low-income students of color who I met in those schools. And so I began to wonder about what would be better and what could be different.
That makes a lot of sense. My own introduction to your work was when you founded dramatically successful charter schools, starting with North Star Academy in Newark. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up starting charter schools and what it was like in the early days of the charter school movement?
Yeah, so I after I had this realization at Robin Hood that that education was the best way to fight poverty, and I quit my job. I had moved with my family from New York City. I had 3 kids to Montclair, New Jersey, which was a very diverse community similar to the place where I grew up, Evanston, Illinois. I wanted to send my kids to diverse public schools, and I just started walking around telling people. I didn't really know what I was saying, but kind of inspired by what I had learned at Brown, and that you could think out of the box and do something to help. I just said, I'm going to start a school. And when you say something out loud enough, you start to find other people who have similar ideas. And I came across a guy who had actually gotten his master's at Brown with Ted Sizer in the mid to late 80s, and who had been leading a very low fee school serving kids in Newark, about a block and a half from the epicenter of the riots. And I went and visited his classroom. It was the best teacher that I'd ever seen. And he told me this would have been like the end of 1995, early 96, that New Jersey had just passed a charter school law. And he explained to me what charter schools were and that he wanted to go start one. And I looked into it, and it seemed like charter schools were a whopping invitation to people like me and this colleague who I'd met, James Verrilli, to go make the magic of the small mission-driven, low-fee schools that I had seen in New York and bring them to the public sector. And we spent about a year and a half writing a charter to create a new kind of school in Newark, New Jersey. And we were one of the first charter schools in the state of New Jersey. And we started with 72 kids in 5th and 6th grade. And it was, I co-led the school and taught, and it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I stood outside the door of the school and greeted every kid with a handshake every day and got to know their families. And it was just an incredible privilege. We met in a community meeting every day and told stories. And it was really inspiring. Just met phenomenal teachers. And it was on the basis of that I thought, like, how could we do more? I think there were like 20 TV cameras following this first group of kids into the school in September of '97. And they said, when are you gonna, this is nice for 72 kids, but why don't you take care of all the kids? And I said, just stay away for a while. Let us do our job. But after a while, I thought we should do more. And I came up with the idea, I think, when we were opening the doors to North Star to set up a nonprofit called Uncommon Schools, not really knowing what it was going to be. And I took the concept from the study of Horace Mann and Brown, who had kind of promoted the idea of the common school. And I thought that the common school, which originally meant the public school that was on the public commons, had become common in the worst sense, and that what we needed were uncommonly good schools for low-income students in places like Newark. And so I guess North Star was our first uncommon school.
That's terrific. I didn't know the origins of Uncommon. I love that. So Uncommon Schools clearly got huge, and you've really reached lots of students through those schools. Have they progressed over time or changed over time, or is it still similar to the model that you had initially in Newark?
Well, we were originally very small, really small class size, and just a really small community, and kind of believe that, if you were more than 150 kids, you couldn't know everybody deeply. And so to that extent, going from that to 21,000 students in 55 schools is a big change. I think we also originally just thought you just hire great teachers and you let them teach, and you don't you empower them, and that's it. And I think that what we've realized is watching our students go on from high school to college and struggle in college initially, I think we realized that we had to be much more systematic about building curriculum and teacher training and methods so that we could ensure that all of our students would be able to get the same quality education, the same equitable outcome as their more affluent peers. And so we ended up essentially centralizing a lot of those functions and trying to build something that was systematically sound for as many kids as possible.
Were there some capabilities for students that you hadn't really thought of at first that you then thought, okay, they really need these, and so we have to, in addition to math or in addition to science and literature, they also need these kinds of capabilities to have success in college?
I think that we were so eager to be helpful to our students that we were not as mindful as we could have been about giving them the independence of thought and action that would cause them to be more successful in college. And I think a lot of our students, without the handholding and support, kind of struggled in the early years. And so I think that our high schools in particular now do a much better job of simulating the type of experience that students will have in college, so that they're prepared when they really do have this tremendous independence. So we would call students up in the morning if they didn't show up for school, and nobody's going to go do that for you in college. And so I think we've improved dramatically. We followed the data. We just looked at what was happening, and our aim was to close the opportunity gap and make sure that our kids were graduating from not just high school but from college at the same rate as their most affluent peers.
That's great. It's interesting because this ability to be autonomous, the skills of autonomy resonate with the way that Brown has structured its curriculum as well. I think all of the choice that students have, it's wonderful, but it's also very difficult. And so I've been really impressed at Brown in how it provides the opportunity, even for college. Very successful high school students who go to college still need that practice with autonomy.
For sure.
So looking back at those charter schools, has your perspective changed on those particular schools? And I think of this because charter schools have become, so controversial as well as ubiquitous. There are lots of charter schools around. I'd love to hear your thoughts more generally about their potential role in U.S. education system and how we can make the best use of the potential of charter schools.
Yeah. So I think there's probably 300,000, maybe up to 500,000 kids who are in charter school networks like Uncommon Schools. I think those students at scale are. I think there was a study from Credo at Stanford who said that these students are getting like 100 extra days of education per year when they're in systems like that. And if that's the case, as I believe it is, we just need more. We need more schools like that. There's no guarantee that a charter school is going to be great in and of itself. But when you empower educators to go and build their own schools and build systems of schools, I think they can go and do great things, and low-income kids can achieve at the highest level when given the opportunity. And so I guess my perspective is, even though we've hit a bit of a rough patch politically, and there are some controversies, that by and large charter schools have succeeded as the R&D arm of public education, and that in the end, especially in 20 to 30 of the biggest cities serving low-income kids around the country, they're likely to grow and serve more students at scale. And I think they're a big part of the future of public education in the United States.
So one of the benefits that I see of charter schools is the ability for educators to innovate and say, we really need this here. This is a problem with the current system. Let me try something else. But then on the other hand, once it gets huge and you've got these bigger networks, there seems to me to be some kind of tension between the innovation part and the replication part of charter schools. If you were Rhode Island and thinking about how we should choose charter schools, how do you think about those two different aims of charter schools? One is this more disruptive aim, and the other is to scale real quality.
Well, I think you need both. I think that we, especially in the early years, we were all innovating quite a bit, and many of those innovations have taken root. But the only way you continue the flywheel of innovation is by opening up the sluice gates for more diverse people to come in and start more types of schools. And then you just need rigorous accountability to make sure that those schools are only moving forward if they're sound in terms of their outcome and support. And similarly, those schools that have figured out how to take those innovations and replicate and grow, and to serve students well at scale, need to get supported. I know that if I were a parent in Providence, I would look very carefully at sending my children to Achievement First, because they're doing great for their students relative to what the options are in the community. It is the responsibility of the state to make sure that there is equity and opportunity for all of its students, and it is the state that's responsible for every single student's education, and so it is challenging to manage. But I think charter schools are a big part of it.
It makes a lot of sense. From Uncommon Schools, you moved on to start Relay Graduate School of Education. Can you tell us about Relay and what led you to focus more specifically on teachers?
So I think about 10 years into Uncommon Schools, I was already trying to figure out like how we have more impact and more scale. And even though we're serving 21,000 students now, I thought the need was so deep. There are like 20 million kids living in poverty, going to living in challenging circumstances. And so I thought that teacher training and ultimately principal training were key levers in making change. And so I was trying to extrapolate from what we were doing at Uncommon, as well as some other charter school networks, and figure out how to take those lessons and bring them to teachers of all public schools at scale.
So this motivation to have you had a motivation to have a broader impact in starting Relay, and really you've educated so many teachers and school leaders, and its graduates are more diverse than from other routes in the country. And it's developed teacher education approaches that are practiced far beyond Relay's classrooms. I'm wondering about your perspective on this work, whether it's had the widespread influence that you were aiming for, and really what you think the potential is for improvements specifically in teacher recruitment and teacher education, where Relay really has excelled. How important is that for us thinking about how to equalize and improve public education in the US?
Well, I think diversifying the teacher pool is big, because the research shows that when students have teachers who look like them, that they do better. I note that something like 20%, a little bit less than 20% of America's teachers are from underrepresented groups, and so when so Relay's developed a residency model. It's probably the largest teacher residency program in the country, where something like 70% of our teachers are teachers of color. And I think that's big, and we need to do more of that nationally. Second, there needs to be teacher training that really focuses on the practical aspects of what it is to be standing in front of students and take responsibility that all of your kids are going to learn, and that you make the weather in your classroom. And I think Relay has done that and brought that message out there. I think that the use of videotape as a way to help people get better, both to show exemplars and to be able to look at yourself, is really big, as well as the use of data and following the data to make sure that we're diagnosing student learning needs and helping them to improve. And so there's been a lot of work done. There's a lot more to do, and I still believe that this is one of the big levers. One of the big surprises to me that I wasn't expecting was that the work that we've done in developing instructional leaders or principals as instructional leaders and principal supervisors probably is the biggest lever for having impact at scale, because if principals are only building managers, they're not able to help their teachers to develop in their schools. But if they are true instructional leaders in the backs of classrooms all day long, they're able to help their teachers to improve well beyond anything that a teacher preparation program can go and do.
As when you think of Brown students, would you encourage them to go through the Relay program after being at Brown? What do you think that's a good way for them to think about entering teaching and education more broadly?
I mean, I remember Brown is only preparing about 15 teachers per year. I'm not even sure whether all of them are going to work in schools serving low-income kids. So what I would say is, first and foremost, if your goal and objective is to go and make a difference in people's lives in a low-income community, and if you want to do that through teaching, find a school where you're going to be successful and be happy. And ideally, if that school is connected to the work and approach of Relay, that Relay would be a fantastic place for you to learn and develop.
That's terrific. Actually, Brown has adjusted its teacher education program, and now it has really a focus on teaching in urban areas and diversifying the workforce and providing students with skills
Awesome.
that are useful. So I think they're both doing somewhat similar work, but Relay has, they both have it, they're both attacking a very important area. So when you were talking about the role of videos, it made me think about all these Zoom meetings we've been on. The pandemic has been such a shock to all of us. It's closed schools, moving us online at unprecedented rates. I just finished teaching my first all online course at Brown, which actually turned out to be quite fun. What are your thoughts about the potential for online education?
So, I mean, I think for most of us, students and teachers, we can't wait to be back in person. And I think the Brown professor, Emily Oster, has been right in campaigning for that early on. And there is nothing that beats the kind of the relationship that you get from being with your peers and your teachers in a tight-knit community. And I think that students who struggle in school in general, and low-income students in particular, that this pandemic has been devastating, and the data has started to show that, and it's gonna be even more evident over time. Having said all that, I think that that the unanticipated experience of people teaching and learning on Zoom will have some good long-term benefits. First, I think it will democratize educational opportunity for people, especially in higher education. It will make the cost lower and the access much deeper. Secondly, I think it makes, and probably most significantly, I think it puts a focus on active learning. I think before the pandemic, people thought online learning was taking a Coursera course, which is asynchronous and basically a lecture. And I think that that teaching on Zoom forces teachers and professors to figure out how to engage their students more deeply. And there's a higher ed institution that teaches online called Minerva, that sort of figured this out early on, that you have to use the technology to engage with your students and figure out how to go way deeper than you do necessarily when you're in person. So third, I think there's just a lot of transparency that emerges from online learning that will I think allow educational institutions to understand better what's happening inside the classrooms. And one of the worst things about education over time is that teachers have the experience that once they're hired, and especially once they're tenured, that they basically close their doors and it's between them and their students. And so there's no kind of accountability and oversight and practice of watching each other and getting better. So one of the best things that you can do in an in-person school is open the doors and have everyone walking in and out of each other's classrooms so that everyone knows what's going on and can support and give feedback to each other. And I think online is a very efficient way to open the doors.
That's terrific. I really love this thinking about how do you leverage the really key part of human interaction for engaging and motivating students, while also making sure that the that the content is there and that the materials are really engaging. I've been doing a bunch of work around tutoring recently, and actually similar to what you've said, this online setting has been great because you get to observe so easily different tutoring sessions, and you can see what works and what doesn't. But one of the things that came out, and you already knew this from the work for me in tutoring, is the importance of really high quality materials, that it's really helpful to have these things that allow teachers and tutors to engage with students and build those relationships, but really make use of the promise of technology with up-to-date information about how students are doing and suggestions for what to be doing next. And you were, not surprisingly, ahead of the game here. Could you tell us a little bit about Cern and how you connected with another Brown graduate to start Cern?
Yeah, so I think going back now 10 plus years, I was traveling around the U.S. and the world really, and I would stand in the backs of classrooms, and I would see two different things. One was the use of technology, and I would look over kids' shoulders, and I would see the same kind of boring thing happening online that I was seeing in person. And then I was in classrooms. I remember like being in a classroom in South Africa and in India, and there were like 75 students and no teacher in the front of the classroom. And I just kept thinking, like, we've got to figure out how to use technology inside of education the way it's being used in so many other fields. And I came back and I told a group of friends that sort of some of these ideas that I had, they were pretty inchoate. And we kind of put our, we put our heads together and said we should go start a digital learning organization. We called it Cern after an imaginary childhood friend of one of our colleagues. And we thought we were going to be teaching everything. And essentially, our chief product officer, and then eventually the chief executive officer, a woman named Shalini Sharma, who I believe is a 1999 Brown grad, sort of emerged as the pathfinder for this organization. And she basically said, Cern equals math. We should focus on math. And two, she had just an uncompromising bar for excellence. And even though kind of theoretically teachers and tutors all want to go teach whatever like comes into their heads, she believed that if systematically we're going to go teach students, and particularly low-income students, because it was a big equity lens to the work, that we needed to have systematic, high-quality curricula and systems. And so we gave birth to this digital math curriculum and program that was tied to the highest standards, and spent something like 20,000 hours of work just following the data and making it better and better. In an ideal classroom, half of the students are with the teacher going deep, and half the students are basically learning through the modality online in a really engaging fashion. And then the class switches and the teacher can look at the data coming out of Cern to help her make the instruction even better. And increasingly we're designing for classrooms to use with tutors and extended learning time, so that it becomes the comprehensive way in which kids will learn math, and that we can help to remediate the learning loss from the time of COVID. I think something like 7,000 schools in this upcoming year will be using Cern.
That's crazy. Do you think the same approach would work across subject areas, or is Cern equal to math means that this is approach that's really key for math?
I think math is probably the easiest, and we have our hands full now developing the middle school curriculum and making Cern even better for math instruction. But I think the next field for somebody to explore is probably foundational reading, the science of reading, and that will be harder, I think, than math, is probably worth pursuing.
Yeah, well, I think there'd be a lot of demand for that if you took that next direction. I actually hear about Cern almost daily, and I'm so thankful that it's available to students. Um, you've been really uniquely successful at identifying needs in the field and creating organizations to address those needs. Are there any secrets that you have that you could share with us about how you've done that, what you've done to kind of have so much creativity and have it be so successful almost at every turn?
Well, not successful at every turn, but I think I am. I think I learned at Brown that you can think outside of the box, that you pursue mission with, with zealously. And for me, I guess I'm most fearless about climbing over a wall without knowing what's on the other side and trying to figure it out once you get into the field. And I feel super afraid and incompetent to go do that alone, but very buoyed by finding peers and collaborators, and just deal with the reality of what you're learning, or what the data is telling you, and be ready to adapt, and have a culture of continuous improvement and learning.
No, I love that. I can imagine too, kind of a fear of not having tried can be just as debilitating as a fear of not being successful, and that it does really help to do these things with others, and to balance different people's strengths. So today you're helping others do what you've done. You've started Together Education, which is an education innovation studio. Would you tell us about Together Education, and whether there's some key challenges that you're addressing there, or some particularly exciting initiatives that you're working on developing?
Yeah, so I want to, at this stage of my work, I want to help other leaders find their way and build solutions to our most challenging and enduring educational issues, especially. And I'm excited about. I've got a colleague working on global education. I've got somebody working on the science of reading. There are a couple of colleagues who are trying to figure out how to help young people find their purpose in their lives through an educational course of study. And the thing that I'm kind of most focused on over the past couple of years is education to employment. So something like 51 out of 100 high school sophomores will not succeed in a 4-year college degree. And we're so successful in our schools at getting kids to and through 4-year college, but across the country, college is not working for everybody, and people need to go out and get jobs and find their way toward a good life. And so I feel like we need to do a lot more in helping people find their career pathways, and doing it earlier. So I've got a colleague who's trying to build a new kind of college. It's called Opportunity College, that is working on dual enrollment, career connected pathways at the end of high school and into post-secondary, to help students to both get degrees and to find their way in jobs and careers. And that's probably the thing that I'm most excited about. And I'm hopeful that in any kind of infrastructure bill and any kind of reform in higher education, that there is more opportunity for people to pursue career connected studies, and to judge these programs on the basis of the outcomes of placing people in meaningful good jobs and careers.
That seems so important, particularly at this moment when we've had the pandemic, and the inequalities and unemployment have been so have really not only shown, not only increased, but also really become evident in our public discussion. And so my hope is that we'll be able to address some of these things as we move along. As students graduate from Brown this year, I'm hopeful that they'll want to identify and address some of these true needs that we have as a society. I can't help but ask what advice you have for these current graduates who want to do good in their life.
Yeah, I feel like I said a version of this just a few moments ago, which is essentially, especially when you're young. When you're in college, you're focused on the self. You're focused on developing your own identity and trying to figure out who you are. I think there's a professor at Brown named Joe Pucci who teaches a course called The Idea of Self, and that's big. But if you're only for yourself, as a great sage once said, then who are you? So the idea, I think, is to figure out how to help others and what's your purpose in doing that. And once you can identify that, just be unafraid to go lead a mission-driven life. And when in doubt, sometimes it's okay to jump over the wall, and please just make sure not to do that alone, but have a lot of good souls around you to help in the work and lead a good life.
I love that. This has been a wonderful conversation. Do you have any final words for us before we conclude?
No, I'm really appreciative to Brown. I'm a big fan of Annenberg and the work that you're doing, and I just wish all the best to the class of 2021.
Oh, thank you, Norman. I want to thank you too for your help in Annenberg. It's a startup that we really need your support, and you've been terrific. This has been a great discussion, and I really look forward to the day when we can welcome you back to campus and we can have a discussion like this in person.
Can't wait. Thanks, Susanna.
Thank you.